Chapter 3 Hinduism and Islam. Sai Baba sometimes spoke of himself as a reincarnation of Kabir, the poet saint of the late 15th and early 16th centuries, who had both Hindu and Muslim disciples and taught each in the terms of his own religion. This is what he himself did. In his own behavior, he did not conform fully to either. He made his abode in the Shirdi mosque and generally used the Islamic name for God, and when he was heard to repeat mantras or sacred phrases, they were Islamic, not Hindu. However, he very seldom said the ritualistic Islamic daily prayers. Some devotees never saw him do so. Others report that he occasionally did on Saturdays or on some special occasion. Why Saturdays is one of the puzzles of Sai Baba, since it is Friday that is the day for corporate prayer among the Muslims. Baba was a vegetarian, like his Hindu followers, and was worshipped by them in Hindu fashion. Also, he referred frequently to his Hindu guru and to Hindu scriptures and gods, that is, forms and aspects of God. He did not, however, encourage a merging of the two paths among his followers. He expected goodwill and tolerance between them. That was all. Although he did not say the namaz, the daily prayers, he expected his Muslim followers to do so. Also, both religions being valid, he did not approve of conversions from one to another, but expected each person to strive in that in which he had been brought up. A Hindu who had been converted to Islam once came to the mosque, and Sai Baba slapped his face, exclaiming, "So, you have got yourself a new father." As a sign of goodwill, he liked his Hindu and Muslim followers to rejoice in one another's festivities, as has long been the custom in India, though of course without actually participating in the worship. So, for instance, a Hindu devotee tells how there would be a procession on the birth anniversary of Sri Ram, after which the Hindus would sing sacred songs interspersed by Muslim reading of the Quran. Sometimes also the Muslims would take out a procession bearing the shoes of Sai Baba on a cushion before them, so as to avoid anthropomorphism or representational worship, and the Hindus would accompany them. Apart even from any specific teaching, the mere influence of Sai Baba's presence led to goodwill and tolerance. The following story by Pathan Muslim called Abdullah illustrates this. I left my hometown of Tarbela when I was still a boy. I had no one to look after me. I wanted to get abroad and see Mecca and other places. I traveled south as far as Manmad, where someone took an interest in me and told me that I could easily make my way to Bombay and from there get a passage to Mecca. Someone else, however, told me that there was a great man called Sai Baba at Shirdi, who showered money on fakirs and would send me to Mecca if I wanted. So I went to Shirdi. As I entered the gate of the mosque, Sai Baba was standing there before me. Our eyes met, and I felt at once that he was my guru. I stayed on at Shirdi. He fed me and other fakirs abundantly, and I decided to stay there and lead my easy life. This was in 1913, when I was still quite young and had not begun to take life seriously. Nevertheless, my stay with Sai Baba brought about a marked change in my attitude of mind. When I first came to Shirdi, I looked upon Hindus as my enemies, but after I had been about 3 years with Sai Baba, this feeling of animosity passed away, and I began to regard them as brothers. Naturally, there was not always goodwill or understanding. It was the Hindus' worship of Sai Baba that was the stumbling block for Muslims, and the performance of this worship in a mosque seemed to be adding insult to injury. Islam expresses the point of view that God alone is to be worshipped, and that the whole universe was evoked by him out of nothingness, and all men are as nothing before him. Hinduism expresses the point of view that the universe with all its beings is a form assumed by God, a manifestation of him, without, however, changing or detracting from his unmanifested reality. To say that God created the universe out of nothing, or that the universe is nothing but an illusion veiling the reality of God, comes to the same. The 2 points of view are therefore 2 aspects of the same truth, 2 ways of saying the same thing. Since a man has no reality other than that given by God, the essence of his being, the reality of him, must be that reality, other than which there is nothing, that is to say, God. By realizing the nothingness of his individuality, by what was called in medieval Christendom self-naughting, a man realizes the universality of his divine essence. Therefore, a man who has realized his true self, which has nothing to do with psychology, but goes beyond the mind to the very essence of being, and is without doubt the true meaning of the Delphic "know thyself," has realized his essential oneness with God. That is, I and my Father are one, even beyond the accident of form. Appreciating this, Hindus worship such a one as God, adhering to the letter of the law. Most Muslims condemn such worship as idolatry. Actually, it is not. It is not worshiping other than God, but, on the contrary, recognizing that the worshipped has destroyed the illusion of otherness from God, which still veils the worshipper. All this is understood by the Sufis, who are the spiritual elect of Islam, and of whom are the great Islamic saints. They teach in secret what the Hindus teach openly. But the exoteric Muslims do not understand. For them there is an absolute gulf between the 2 viewpoints, and for them the Hindus are pantheists or idolaters. The Sufi poet El-Hallaj used to proclaim when in a state of ecstasy, "An el-Haq," I am truth. The truth is a divine name, and he was executed for blasphemy in accordance with Islamic law, although the Sufis understood and have continued to revere him. Another Sufi, Abu Sa'id, skirted the law, declaring negatively, "There is nothing beneath this robe other than Allah." A Sufi incantation used commonly to this day runs, "I seek pardon of God for all in me that is not God." The Hindu worship of Sai Baba started very simply in 1908 with a child's homage to him. A Hindu lady tells the story. "My brother Bapu Rao, who was then a child of 4, used to go every morning and put a flower on Sai Baba's head and worship him. That was the beginning of the regular worship of Baba, as he had not permitted others to do it before that. The child was simply honoring Sai Baba as he had seen idols honored in temple worship. And from that time, the practice grew up of doing full ritualistic worship as to an idol. An intelligent Hindu does not believe that an idol is God, any more than an intelligent Catholic believes that a holy picture or a statue of Jesus Christ or a saint is God. Few people are capable of conceiving of the formless absolute, are the critics of idolatry, and the ordinary Hindu makes worship easier by concentrating on the manifestation of God in a certain form and aspect, characterized by a certain picture or statue. He may be led thereby in due course to realization of the formless, whether in this life or beyond it. It is said in the Gita, "Whatever form a man worships, he really worships me." As ritualistic worship with flowers and sandal paste is performed for an idol, so also it was for one who is felt to be more than a saint, one who has realized his identity with Supreme Being, and is therefore a conscious manifestation of God. Not all the Muslims at Shirdi could appreciate this, especially when their worship took place in a mosque. The result was that Muslim followers came to be far outnumbered by the Hindus. Occasionally also there were protests. One Rohilla Muslim was constantly with Sai Baba and would sit and read the Quran at his feet at night, and protested against the allowing the midday Hindu worship with its music in the mosque. Baba only smiled and said, "All that is Allah." Puzzle over it as he would, it seemed to the poor man that Sai Baba was betraying Islam, and he decided that he must make retribution. One day, when Sai Baba was out walking, he came up behind him with a club, intending to strike him down. Sai Baba turned just at that moment, touched his left wrist, and looked at him. Under the force of this gaze, he sank to the ground, powerless to lift the club or even to rise. Someone came and helped him up. A few days later, he went and took leave of Sai Baba, and with his blessings left Shirdi for good. On another occasion, a Muslim follower, Murajaman, sprang up suddenly at night and, drawing his sword, declared that the Hindus were spoiling Sai Baba by worshipping him and asking permission to cut their throats. But Sai Baba did not give permission. He simply pacified him, saying, "It is I who am mad and am responsible for their worshipping me. So if you want to cut any throats, you must begin with mine." To the Hindus, tolerance comes far easier. Their religion itself recognizes many forms of doctrine and ways of approach to God, not conflicting like Muslim or Christian sects, but recognizing each other as legitimate and suited to various temperaments and levels of understanding. The Hindus find it easier, therefore, to recognize the paths afforded in other religions. Hindu devotees worship the divine man in Sai Baba, and if Muslims did not, that was their concern. There were, of course, bigoted Hindus as well as Muslims, but their bigotry took a milder form. It injured only themselves, being expressed simply as refusal to worship a Muslim guru. Cases of such prejudice have been quoted already, and of how they were overcome. The following story, like that of the Muslim Abdullah quoted above, illustrates the silent influence. The deputy collector H.V. Soth met a devout but simple-minded Brahmin called Megha, in whom he took an interest. He had him instructed in mantrams and sent him to Brosh to worship Shiva there. After some time, he told him that Sai Baba was Shiva incarnate and sent him to Shirdi to worship him. Megha, however, heard at the railway station that Baba was a Muslim, and horrified at the idea of prostrating himself before a Muslim, begged to be excused from going there. But Soth insisted, so he made the journey, all but reluctantly. Before ever he reached the mosque, Sai Baba shouted angrily, "Throw that scoundrel out," and chased him away. He also turned angrily on Soth and berated him for sending such a crude and narrow person. That was outwardly. But inwardly, the influence began working. A year or so later, Megha felt genuinely drawn to Shirdi, and this time he was driven away. No, but he entered the mosque instead and stayed there. As with Abdullah, the interchange took place without verbal instruction. He served Sai Baba and conducted worship there daily. And when he died, Sai Baba said, "This was a true devotee of mine." More and more the Hindus predominated. Even the renovation of the mosque was carried out by them. When Sai Baba first took up his abode, there was dilapidated, a mud structure, with walls only 8 feet high by 14 feet long, running around 3 sides, while the east side stood open to wind and rain. About half the roof had caved in, and the rest was sagging and liable to fall. Sai Baba could not be persuaded to live anywhere else, though his devotees would gladly have built a house or temple for him, so they decided to rebuild the mosque. Several times they asked permission, but he refused. Finally, one of them, G.R. Gundi, a revenue inspector who had obtained a son through Sai Baba's blessing, brought cartloads of stone and dumped them in front of the mosque, declaring that he was going to start work on it. Sai Baba told him to take the stones away and use them to renovate the local Hindu temples, but he did not. Finally, Baba allowed himself to be persuaded, and the work began. Even then, he interfered constantly and often pulled down what had been done. It was only at night that steady, uninterrupted work could be done, and not every night either. He used to sleep alternate nights in the mosque and the guest house, and his nights in the latter were the time for work. Baba insisted on proper Islamic architecture, with minarets and a mimbar, or recessing wall on the west, that is the wall facing Mecca, and steps supporting lamps. However, he also had a duni, or fireplace, where a perpetual fire was kept burning. Over against this, he had a seat made for himself with a low balustrade to lean on. The mosque was thus a mixture of orthodoxy and innovation. He used to refer to it as a Brahmin mosque, though this did not necessarily mean Hindu, since he used the word Brahmin in its correct sense of spiritual elect. In the center of the yard outside the mosque, he had a Tulsi Vrindavan constructed, that is, a masonry block about 3 feet high, containing a Tulsi plant, sacred to the Hindus, for them to circumambulate according to tradition, pradakshina. Inside the mosque were grinding stones, and Sai Baba used to spend much of his time grinding wheat into flour. This seemed to be one of his symbolical occupations, though he would bake a sort of cake with the flour in an oven outside the mosque and distribute it freely. Baba also kept mud pots in the mosque or just outside it, from which he used to pour water, as described in a previous chapter, and others in which he used to put the food he begged. This was kept outside the mosque, and the sweeper woman, one of considered the lowest caste, was allowed to take what she liked out of it before he ate, as also were dogs, crows, or anyone who came.